penniless single mother used sign language to soothe a billionaire's deaf son. Unaware, the boy's silent tears held the key to her own salvation. "Ma'am, you cannot be in this wing. It's for private patients only." The biting cold of the late November wind hammered against the sterile glass of the hospital corridor, a relentless assault that mirrored the chill seeping deep into Alara's bones. She pulled her threadbare coat tighter, a garment so worn the fabric felt as fragile as her own dwindling hope, and watched the sterile silence of the hallway stretch out before her like an accusation. She was not supposed to be here, in the gleaming, polished world of the affluent sick. A place where suffering was cushioned by wealth and privacy was a commodity she could no longer afford. Every soft click of a closing door, every hushed footstep on the marble floor, echoed her unworthiness. She was an outsider, a ghost haunting the periphery of a life she once understood. A life where she had worn crisp nursing scrubs instead of this faded, weary coat. Her own life felt like a distant memory, shattered into 1,000 desperate pieces after she was unjustly fired for the crime of holding a dying child's hand for too long, for offering a moment of sincere comfort that didn't appear on a billing statement. Now, she cleaned the spaces where miracles happened for other people. Her hands, once skilled in providing gentle care, now raw from harsh chemicals and endless scrubbing. She was invisible, a necessary function but not a person, and she had learned to embrace the shadows. Total silence. Her daughter, Lily, was the only light in her deepening twilight, the one pure, unwavering reason she endured the hollow ache in her chest and the gnawing hunger in her belly. Lily's laughter was a sound more precious than any coin, her small hand in Alara's a more profound security than any stately home. But love could not pay the rent that was 3 weeks overdue, nor could it fill the cupboards that grew emptier with each passing day. The leftovers she had carefully packed from the hospital cafeteria, a small portion of discarded sandwiches and a bruised apple, felt heavy in her bag, a sacred offering for her daughter that left her own stomach in a tight, painful knot. She was on her way to clean the administrative offices on the 3rd floor, a job she had taken out of sheer desperation, a job that paid just enough to keep the single, flickering light bulb in their tiny apartment from being extinguished for good. A wave of dizziness washed over her, a familiar companion born of exhaustion and hunger, and she steadied herself against the cold, unyielding wall. The world shimmered for a moment, the polished floor reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights in a way that made her head spin. She just needed to get through the night. She had to. For Lily. It was then that a sound, raw and heartbroken, splintered the heavy hush of the private wing. It was the sound of a child's sob, a desperate, unrelenting cry that seemed to echo from a place of unbearable pain. Alara froze. Her training, her very nature, surged within her, an instinct to soothe and protect that had not been erased by her dismissal. The sound pulled her forward, a current she was powerless to resist. She followed the ragged gasps and shattered cries down the corridor to a large, ornate door that was slightly ajar. Peeking through the narrow opening, her heart clenched. Inside a cavernous private suite, a small boy, no older than Lily, was crumpled on the floor, his small body racked with sobs that made no sound. He was crying in total, profound silence. A man stood near the window, his back to the room, his posture rigid and commanding. He wore an impeccable, dark suit, a stark silhouette against the pounding rain that streaked the window pane like tears. He looked as haunted as the room felt, a statue carved from grief. A team of doctors and nurses stood by helplessly, their expressions a mixture of professional frustration and weary pity. "We've tried everything, Mr. Vance," one of the doctors said, his voice low and strained. "He won't respond to any stimuli. He just cries." Alara's gaze was fixed on the boy. She saw the raw agony in the clench of his small fists, the desperate plea in his tear-streaked face. And she saw something else. His hands. They moved in small, frantic, aborted gestures. They were trying to speak. A sharp gasp escaped her lips before she could stifle it. The boy was deaf. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She understood. She knew this language of silence, this world of unspoken words. Her own grandmother had been deaf, and she had spent her childhood learning the graceful, intricate dance of sign language, a skill she had cherished as a sacred connection to the woman she loved. The people in this room, for all their medical knowledge and wealth, were blind to what the child was screaming. They saw only tears. She saw a desperate, trapped voice. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her compassion. She was a cleaner, an intruder. If she interfered, she would be fired instantly, losing the one fragile lifeline she had left. She should turn away, walk back into the shadows where she belonged, and forget the image of the trembling, silent boy. She had her own child to think about, her own suffering. But the boy's silent sob echoed in the deepest part of her soul, a place that had not yet been hardened by despair. It was the sound of a child who felt utterly and completely alone in the world. She could not leave him. She simply couldn't. Taking a deep, trembling breath, Alara pushed the heavy door open. The soft click it made as it swung inward seemed to echo in the cavernous room. Every head turned towards her, their faces a mixture of surprise and annoyance. The man by the window, Mr. Vance, turned slowly, and for the first time, she saw his face. His eyes were the color of a stormy sea, hollow and haunted, yet they held a flicker of something sharp and intelligent. They were the eyes of a man who had lost everything that mattered. "What is this? Who are you?" the head nurse demanded, her voice crisp and impatient. Alara's heart thudded wildly against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Her own voice, when it came, was a quiet, steady whisper. I think I can help." Ignoring their shocked silence, she walked slowly, deliberately, towards the small, weeping boy on the floor. She did not look at the powerful man or the disapproving medical staff. Her entire world narrowed to the fragile child. She knelt down, making herself small, unthreatening. The worn fabric of her jeans was rough against the polished marble floor. The boy, Leo, didn't look up, his face buried in his hands, his small shoulders shaking with silent grief. Alara waited a moment, letting the storm of his sorrow rage. Then, slowly, she lifted her hands. Her movements were gentle, fluid, a stark contrast to the rigid tension in the room. Her fingers formed a simple question, a word of pure, innocent comfort. "Friend?" she signed, her expression soft and sincere. The boy's crying faltered. A single, shuddering gasp broke from his lips. He slowly, hesitantly, lifted his head. His eyes, red-rimmed and filled with a universe of pain, met hers. They were filled with a shocking, profound disbelief. He had been screaming into a void, and for the first time someone had heard him. He stared at her hands as if they were a miracle, a sudden light in an endless darkness. Alara offered a small, tender smile, holding his gaze. She signed again, her hands moving with the steady grace of long practice. "My name is Alara. What's yours?" Leo's own small hands, which had been clenched into tight fists of anguish, slowly uncurled. They trembled, clumsy from disuse and grief, but they moved. With a heartbreaking effort, he signed his name. Leo. A seismic shift occurred in the room. The sterile silence was no longer empty. It was filled with an unspoken, sacred conversation. Alexander Vance, the man by the window, took a half-step forward, his own breath catching in his throat. He had not seen his son communicate, not truly, since the accident. He had not seen anything but the impenetrable wall of his silent tears. He watched, frozen, as this woman in a threadbare coat broke through a barrier his millions of dollars and teams of the world's best specialists could not even scratch. He felt a crack in the icy shell that had encased his heart for over a year. A single, fragile ray of warmth. Alara continued to sign, her questions simple, her presence a quiet, unwavering comfort. "Are you sad?" Leo's face crumpled again, but this time, the tears that streamed down his cheeks were different. They were not tears of frantic, lonely despair, but of cathartic release. He nodded, a sharp, jerky movement. His small hands moved again, forming the signs with a desperate urgency. "I miss Mommy." The three simple words landed in the center of the room with the force of a physical blow. A sob caught in Alexander's throat. It was the first time Leo had mentioned his mother since the crash that had taken her from them. The crash that had stolen Leo's hearing and his joy. This stranger, this quiet woman with gentle hands, had unlocked the prison of his son's grief. Alara's own eyes glistened with unshed tears. She didn't offer empty platitudes or false reassurances. She simply acknowledged his pain, her expression one of profound, shared sorrow. "I know," she signed, her touch on the words as gentle as a blanket. "It hurts so much." Leo looked at her, truly looked at her, and in his eyes, a tiny flicker of trust, of hope was kindled. He reached out a small, trembling hand and placed it on her knee. Connection was forged. It was a lifeline. The spell was shattered by a sharp, imperious voice. "That is quite enough." The hospital administrator, a woman with a face as hard and polished as the marble floors, snapped from the doorway. Her eyes, cold and dismissive, swept over Alara's worn clothes with undisguised contempt. "You are a cleaner. You will collect your things and leave the premises immediately. You are fired." The words were like stones, hard and cruel. Alara flinched, the brief warmth of her connection with Leo instantly extinguished by the biting cold of reality. She had known this would happen. She had risked everything for a moment of kindness, and now she was paying the price. She looked at Leo, whose face was once again clouded with fear and confusion. He saw the woman's harsh expression, saw the change in Alara's demeanor, and his lower lip began to tremble. Alara gave his hand a gentle squeeze, a silent promise she knew she couldn't keep. With dignified resolve, she stood up, her back straight, her head held high. She did not beg or argue. She simply accepted her fate. She gave one last, sorrowful look at the small boy, her heart aching for him, and then turned to leave. Alexander Vance finally moved, his voice a low growl. Wait, but it was too late. Alara was already walking away, a fleeting shadow disappearing down the long, gleaming corridor. She didn't look back. She couldn't bear to. She had to get home to Lily. He was left standing in the silent room, his son's quiet, questioning gaze fixed on him. For the first time in a year, the silence in the room was not one of grief, but of profound, aching loss for the woman who had just vanished. She was gone. The days that followed were a blur of deepening despair for Alara. The city felt colder, the shadows longer, the gnawing hunger more acute. The loss of the cleaning job, meager as it was, had been a devastating blow. The eviction notice was now taped to her door, its bold, red letters a constant, screaming reminder of her failure. She spent her days searching for work, any work, her worn shoes treading miles of unforgiving pavement, only to be met with polite refusals and dismissive glances. She ate only when Lily was asleep, saving every last morsel of food for her daughter, telling her with a bright, false smile that she wasn't hungry. Her own body grew more fragile, her face paler, her eyes shadowed with a weary exhaustion that sleep could not cure. Yet, through it all, she maintained her quiet dignity. She never let Lily see her cry. She would read to her every night from a worn copy of a fairy tale, her voice soft and steady, creating a small, magical world within the four crumbling walls of their room. A world where kindness was always rewarded and brave heroines always found their happily ever after. She clung to these stories as much as Lily did, a desperate prayer that goodness still meant something in a world that felt so relentlessly cruel. She was so lost in her own struggle she barely registered the small miracles that began to happen. It started with a plain white envelope slipped under her door. Inside, there was no note, only a stack of crisp $100 bills, enough to pay the rent for 3 months. Alara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She counted it 3 times, her trembling fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar texture of new money. It had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. But the money was real. She paid the landlord, a gruff, impatient man who looked at her with suspicion but took the cash without question. The red notice vanished from her door. A few days later, a large box appeared outside her apartment. Again, there was no note, no indication of who had sent it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were a thick, warm winter coat for her and another for Lily, along with new boots, scarves, and gloves. At the bottom of the box was a grocery gift card with a balance so high it made her dizzy. That night, for the first time in months, Alara and Lily ate a full, hot meal. Lily's delighted squeals as she bit into a juicy piece of chicken were a sound that brought tears to Alara's eyes. She felt a profound, overwhelming gratitude, but it was laced with a deep, unsettling mystery. Who was doing this? Why? She had no family, no friends who could afford such generosity. It felt like a dream, a fairy tale unfolding in her grim reality, and she was terrified of waking up. Meanwhile, in a sleek, cavernous office overlooking the city from the top floor of a gleaming skyscraper, Alexander Vance watched. The name on the building, Vance Industries, meant nothing to him anymore. The empire he had built felt like a hollow monument to a life that no longer existed. Since his wife's death, he had merely been going through the motions, his heart a frozen, useless thing in his chest. But now something had shifted. The image of the gentle woman with the sad, kind eyes and the graceful hands was burned into his memory. Finding her had become his obsession. His private investigators, the best in the world, had located her within hours. They had given him a file, a thin folder that detailed a life of quiet hardship and unwavering virtue. He read about her unjust firing from the nursing position, her struggle to raise her daughter alone, her desperate poverty, and he read about her character. How her former colleagues described her as selfless, gentle, and profoundly compassionate. Every word confirmed what he had felt in that hospital room. He had witnessed an act of pure, uncalculated kindness. It was a language he had long since forgotten in his transactional world of power and wealth. He was the one sending the money, the clothes, the food. He watched her through discreet surveillance, his heart aching with a mixture of shame for his intrusion and an overwhelming protective urge. He saw her give half of her anonymous gift of groceries to an elderly neighbor whose pension was late. He saw her stop to wrap her own new scarf around the neck of a homeless man shivering on a street corner. He saw a goodness so pure, so innate, it humbled him to his very core. She was a light in a world he had believed was entirely dark. She was not just healing his son. She was, with every selfless act, slowly, painstakingly, healing him. He knew he couldn't remain a distant, hidden savior forever. He needed to see her, to talk to her, to thank her properly. More than that, he felt a desperate, undeniable pull towards her. A need to be near her quiet strength, to feel the warmth of her gentle spirit. He devised a plan, a way to meet her that would feel like chance, a way to approach her not as a billionaire benefactor, but as Leo's father, as a man who was just as broken as she was. He just needed to find the right moment. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The perfect moment came on a crisp, golden afternoon. He had his driver take him and Leo to a small, unassuming park near Alara's apartment, a place his investigators had told him she often took her daughter. He was dressed not in one of his impeccable suits, but in simple jeans and a sweater, a deliberate attempt to shed the armor of his wealth. Leo, holding his father's hand, was quiet, his eyes scanning the playground with a familiar, haunted emptiness. But he wasn't crying. Since Alara's visit, the endless, silent tears had stopped. They had been replaced by a deep, watchful silence, as if he were waiting for something, or someone. And then Alexander saw them. Alara was pushing a little girl with bright, laughing eyes on a swing. She was wearing the warm coat he had sent, the deep blue color making her pale skin seem almost luminous in the amber hue of the setting sun. Her face, though still thin and etched with worry, was relaxed as she watched her daughter, a soft, tender smile on her lips. His heart thudded in his chest. He took a deep breath. It was time. He led Leo towards them, his steps feeling unnaturally heavy. As they drew closer, Lily, Alara's daughter, saw them and pointed. "Look, Mommy, a new boy." Alara turned, her smile fading as she recognized them. A flicker of alarm crossed her face, her body instantly tensing. She thought he was here to cause trouble, to accuse her of something. "Please, don't be alarmed," Alexander said, his voice softer than he intended. We wanted to thank you." Alara's eyes darted from his face to the small, silent boy holding his hand. Her gaze softened instantly when she looked at Leo. She knelt down, her attention shifting completely to the child. "Hello, Leo," she signed, her smile returning, sincere and gentle. "It's good to see you." Leo's face lit up with a brilliant, unadulterated joy that Alexander had not seen in over a year. He let go of his father's hand and rushed forward, signing back with an enthusiasm that was breathtaking to witness. "You came back." Alara chuckled, a quiet, musical sound. "I'm happy to see you too." She looked up at Alexander, her eyes filled with a questioning confusion. "I don't understand. The packages. The money. Was that you?" Alexander nodded, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "Yes, it was the only way I could think to thank you. What you did for my son. No one has been able to reach him since the accident. You gave him his voice back. You gave me my son back." The raw emotion in his voice was undeniable. This was not the cold, commanding man from the hospital. This was a grieving father, his pain laid bare. They sat on a nearby park bench as the children began to play together, Lily chattering away while Leo watched, communicating with his expressive face and small, signing hands. A comfortable silence settled between them, the chill in the air forgotten. This was the moment, the confession scene. The park grew quiet as other families headed home, the sky streaked with shades of violet and rose. A single, flickering lamp post cast a golden glow over them. "My wife, her name was Clara," Alexander began, his voice barely a whisper, the words raw and difficult. "She was driving. Leo was in the back. A truck ran a red light. I was in a meeting 1,000 miles away, closing a deal that I thought was the most important thing in the world." His voice cracked. "Clara died instantly. Leo. The doctors said the trauma and the impact caused his deafness. He hasn't spoken a word or signed one about her until you came." He stared at his hands, unable to meet her gaze. "He just cried. For a year. And I was drowning in the silence with him." Alara listened, her steady, unwavering eyes never leaving his face. She didn't offer pity or platitudes. She offered him the profound gift of being truly seen, of having his unbearable grief witnessed without judgment. When he finished, she didn't speak. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, slightly dented thermos. She poured a cup of still warm tea and handed it to him. The simple, nurturing gesture was more comforting than any words could have been. The warmth of the cup seeped into his cold hands. Then, she shared her own story. "I learned sign language from my grandmother," she said, her voice soft. "She raised me after my parents died. She was the kindest person I've ever known. She taught me that sometimes the most important things are said without a single word." She spoke of her own quiet loneliness, of the struggle to be both mother and father to Lily, of the constant fear that lived in the back of her mind. They were two souls from impossibly different worlds, a billionaire and a pauper. Yet on that park bench, under the amber hue of the fading light, they were the same. They were two people who had been shattered by loss and were trying to piece themselves back together. A bond was forged between them, a tender, unspoken connection built on shared tragedy. As they stood to leave, Alexander knew he couldn't let her walk out of his life again. "Alara," he said, her name feeling sacred on his lips. "I need your help. Not with money. I have more than enough of that. Leo needs you. He needs someone who understands him. Please, would you consider being his private companion? Tutor, a friend. I'll pay you whatever you want. I'll give you a place to live, security. Anything. Just, please don't disappear again." She looked at Leo, who was watching her with wide, hopeful eyes. She looked at her own daughter, who was holding Leo's hand. And she looked at this powerful, broken man who was offering her not just a job, but a lifeline. Hope, fragile and new, bloomed in her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Life changed overnight. Alara and Lily moved into a beautiful, sun-filled suite of rooms in Alexander's stately mansion. The cavernous, silent house, once a mausoleum of grief, slowly began to fill with the sounds of life, Lily's laughter echoing in the halls, the soft aroma of Alara's cooking wafting from the kitchen, the quiet, rhythmic sounds of two children playing. Alara's presence was a gentle, healing balm. She spent her days with Leo, teaching him, playing with him, and patiently helping him unpack the tangled grief in his heart. With her, he blossomed. He began to smile again, to play, to be a child. The haunted look in his eyes was replaced by a bright spark of curiosity. Alexander watched the transformation with a sense of awe and a deepening affection for the woman responsible for it. He found himself rearranging his schedule, canceling important meetings just to be home in time to have dinner with Alara and the children. He loved watching her gentle interactions with Leo, the way her hands seemed to dance as she told him stories. He loved the quiet evenings after the children were in bed, when he and Alara would sit in the living room, sharing a cup of tea and talking for hours. He was falling in love with her quiet strength, her selfless heart, her unwavering sincerity. He knew he was, and it terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. The true test of their new world came in the form of an invitation. The annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala, the very hospital that had so cruelly discarded Alara, was approaching. Alexander was the event's primary benefactor and guest of honor. He insisted that Alara attend with him. She was hesitant, the memory of her humiliation still a raw wound. "I don't belong in a world like that, Alexander," she said, her voice small. "I don't have anything to wear." He simply smiled, and the next day, a series of boxes arrived from the city's most exclusive boutiques. Inside was a simple, elegant gown of deep sapphire silk, a dress that was understated but impeccably made. It complemented her quiet beauty perfectly. With a gentle, unwavering resolve, he convinced her. "You belong anywhere you choose to be," he told her, his eyes sincere. "And I want you by my side." When she walked down the grand staircase on the night of the gala, her hair swept up, the silk dress shimmering under the crystal chandelier, Alexander gasped. She was breathtaking, but it wasn't just her external beauty. It was the inner light of her goodness that radiated from her, an aura of pure, gentle grace. For the first time, she looked not like a survivor, but like a queen. He felt a fierce, protective love for her that was so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He was ready to slay dragons for her. The ballroom was a sea of gleaming jewels and polished smiles. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of powerful people making powerful conversation. Alara felt a tremor of her old fear, the feeling of being an outsider, an imposter. But Alexander's hand was a warm, steady presence on the small of her back, a silent anchor in the overwhelming tide of wealth and status. He introduced her simply as "my dear friend, Alara," his voice filled with a pride and respect that silenced any potential questions. For a while, the evening was magical, but the dragon was waiting. Across the room, Alara saw her, the hospital administrator who had fired her, a woman named Ms. Albright. With her was an older, imperious-looking woman with a face set in a permanent sneer of disapproval. Alexander's face tightened. "My former mother-in-law, Beatrice," he murmured, his voice low. "Clara's mother. Be prepared." Beatrice and Ms. Albright moved towards them like sharks sensing blood in the water. They cornered Alara while Alexander was momentarily pulled away by another donor. Beatrice's eyes, as cold and hard as diamonds, swept over Alara's dress with disdain. "So," she began, her voice dripping with venom, "you're the little charity case my son-in-law has taken in. A cleaner, I hear." The public humiliation began. Ms. Albright joined in, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "She was fired for incompetence and for bothering our high-profile patients. It's shocking that Mr. Vance would bring such a person to an event like this." Alara stood her ground, her face pale but her expression dignified. She refused to let them see her crumble. But their words were sharp, poisoned darts, and they found their mark. "Tell me," Beatrice hissed, leaning in closer, "how much did you have to manipulate a grieving man to get him to buy you that dress? You gold-digging parasites are all the same." Preying on the vulnerable, a circle of onlookers had formed, their faces a mixture of pity and cruel curiosity. Alara felt the familiar chill of shame, the walls closing in. Her chest tightened. She was about to turn and flee when a calm, commanding voice cut through the toxic atmosphere like a blade. "That is enough." Alexander was there. He had moved through the crowd so silently that no one had noticed his approach. He stood beside Alara, slipping a protective arm around her waist. His presence was a solid, unwavering shield. The crowd fell silent. He looked not at Alara, but directly at Beatrice and Ms. Albright, and his eyes were not those of a grieving man, but of a powerful CEO about to liquidate a failed asset. They were chips of ice. "For a year," Alexander began, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom, "I watched my son suffer in a silent prison of grief that none of you, with all your money and all your expertise, could penetrate." He gestured towards Ms. Albright. "This hospital and its specialists offered him pills and platitudes, growing impatient with his pain. They saw him as a problem to be managed." Then his gaze shifted to Beatrice. "And you, his own grandmother, you visited him twice, staying just long enough to tell me how much his silence was a disappointment to the family name." The collective gasp in the room was audible. Beatrice's face went white with fury and shock. "And then," Alexander continued, his voice softening as he turned his gaze to Alara, a look of profound tenderness and reverence on his face, "this woman, who you call a cleaner, came into his room. She had nothing. She was hungry. She was desperate. She was about to be fired by your heartless administration for the crime of being kind. And she did what none of you could. She listened to his silence. She spoke his language. She reached into his darkness and pulled him back into the light. She did not see a high-profile patient or a disappointment. She saw a little boy who was hurting, and she healed him." The salvation monologue was complete. The power dynamic had been irrevocably reversed. He then delivered the final, devastating blow. "So, let me be perfectly clear. Alara is not my charity case. She is the person who saved my family. And as of this moment, Vance Industries is withdrawing all of its funding from this hospital." A wave of shock and frantic murmurs swept through the ballroom. Instead, Alexander announced, his voice ringing with authority, "I will be endowing a new, independent pediatric wellness foundation, a place focused on compassionate, holistic care. And its director?" He paused, smiling down at Alara, whose eyes were glistening with tears of disbelief and catharsis. "Will be Alara. Her first act will be to hire back every nurse Ms. Albright has fired for being too compassionate." He looked back at his stunned mother-in-law and the ashen-faced administrator. "You are not just cruel," he said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "You are irrelevant." He turned his back on them, leading a stunned but radiant Alara away from the wreckage of their public disgrace. The crowd parted for them like the sea. He had not just defended her, he had crowned her. The antagonist was left speechless, utterly shattered. Back in the quiet sanctuary of the mansion, the adrenaline of the evening began to fade, leaving behind a raw, tender silence. The ornate grandfather clock in the hall echoed the loud thudding of Alara's heart. Alexander led her into the library, where a soft fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. He turned to her, his stormy eyes searching her face. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. She could only nod, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of overwhelming, cathartic release. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No one has ever stood up for me like that." He reached out and gently brushed the tear away with his thumb, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. "I would do it again, 1,000 times," he said, his voice low and intense. "Alara, don't you see? You didn't just save Leo. You saved me. I was a ghost in this house, a hollow man just waiting for the end. You filled this sterile silence with life, with warmth, with hope. You taught me how to feel again." He took both of her hands in his grip firm and steady. "This isn't about gratitude. It's not about me repaying you for what you did for my son. I've fallen in love with you. I love your quiet strength, your selfless heart, your unwavering goodness. I love you." The declaration hung in the air between them, simple, profound, and undeniable. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the key that unlocked the last door to her own shattered heart. She looked into his eyes and saw her future. She saw safety. She saw hope. She saw a love that was as deep and real as her own. "I love you, too," she whispered, the words feeling like coming home. He closed the distance between them and kissed her, a tender, sacred promise in the flickering firelight. All her material problems were solved, yes, but more importantly, for the first time in her life, her virtuous, weary heart had found a safe harbor. She was secure. 1 year later, the relentless pounding rain and biting cold were a distant memory, replaced by the golden glow of a perfect summer afternoon. The sprawling gardens behind the mansion, once meticulously manicured but lifeless, were now a vibrant explosion of color and sound. Lily and Leo, now inseparable, chased each other through a sprinkler, their delighted shrieks and laughter replacing the old, heavy silence. Leo's hands moved with joyful, fluid confidence as he signed a joke to Lily, who, after a year of Alara's patient teaching, was nearly as fluent as he was. Alara, no longer pale and threadbare, watched them from a blanket on the lawn, her face radiant with a deep, settled happiness. She wore a simple summer dress, and on her finger, a simple, elegant ring shimmered in the sunlight. She was now Alara Vance, director of a thriving foundation that was changing the face of pediatric care in the city, and more importantly, she was a beloved wife and mother. Alexander came and sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. The haunted, hollow look was gone from his eyes forever, replaced by a warm, steady light. He was no longer a ghost in his own life. He was present, he was happy, he was whole. He leaned over and kissed her, a gesture of everyday tenderness that still made her heart flutter. "Look at them," he murmured, watching the children play. "Look at the life you've built here." She leaned her head on his shoulder, a profound sense of peace settling over her. "We built it," she corrected him gently. Together they sat in comfortable silence, watching their children, a perfect, beautiful family forged from the ashes of grief and saved by a single, selfless act of kindness in a sterile hospital corridor. They were home. This story is a testament to the profound, seismic power of a single act of kindness. It shows us that in a world that often feels cold and transactional, the currency of compassion is still the most valuable of all. Alara, with nothing to her name but a pure heart, offered a moment of understanding to a suffering child, an act that cost her the little she had but ultimately gained her everything. Alexander, a man who had all the material wealth in the world, discovered that his fortune was meaningless until it was guided by love and used to protect the goodness he found in another. Their journey reminds us that we never truly know the silent battles others are fighting, and that the simplest gesture of empathy can be a lifeline, an anchor in the storm of someone else's despair. It is a fable of how light can find its way into the darkest of places, and how two shattered souls can piece each other back together, creating something more beautiful and stronger than what was there before. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the magic that happens when we choose kindness over indifference, we hope you'll continue this journey with us. The world can always use more stories that celebrate the unwavering strength of the human spirit and the redemptive power of love. These are the tales that give us hope, that inspire us to be better, and that reaffirm our faith in the quiet, everyday miracles that surround us if we only have the eyes to see them. For more soul-stirring and heartwarming stories like this one, please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. Your support allows us to keep creating inspiring content that celebrates the best of humanity. We'll see you in the next one.